listeners, this is your host, Dacia. So, unless you're a cellist, you have likely never heard of the subject of this episode with our guest, Louise Dubin. It's about a composer named Auguste Franchomme. I hope that you enjoyed my attempt at French pronunciation. Also hard to pronounce, French pronunciation. And if you do, make sure you go to iTunes and subscribe to us and rate us and review us. You won't be sorry. And by the way, don't forget that you can also follow us on YouTube. In addition to just listening to the episodes of the show, you can also catch some behind-the-scenes stuff and some extras over on our YouTube channel. So, enough of me. Enjoy the show. My name is Dacia Clay. I'm the audio librarian here at Classical 91.7. While I'm a real librarian, I have a deep, dark secret. I know very little about classical music. I grew up listening to rock, and I know something about jazz. But when it comes to classical, but I really want to learn. So, every week on this show, a classical music expert will give me a piece of classical music they think I should know, and then we'll discuss it. Come learn with me in the classical classroom. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Classical Classroom. I'm Dacia Clay, and here with me all the way from the Cat-Friendly Radio Foundation in New York is Louise Dubin. Louise is a cellist. She's a soloist, chamber musician, and orchestral player. She's a scholar of the cellist and composer Auguste Franchomme, whose name I hope I did not just butcher. She currently performs with the Baltimore and New Jersey Symphonies, the Choir Ensemble, the Radio City Orchestra, and others. And she's recently put out a CD called the Franchomme Project. Louise Dubin, welcome to the Classical Classroom.
Thank you, Dacia, for having me. And you almost pronounced his name correctly.
Almost?
Well, you got the hard part right. His first name is Auguste.
Auguste,
and
okay.
His last name is Franchomme. A lot of people say Franchomme, including most cellists, but it's actually Franchomme, and you got it right.
Okay, awesome. It helped that you sent me a pronouncer, so that, you know.
Oh, I forgot that I did that.
Well, I was going to ask what you're going to be teaching me about today, but I think we've kind of revealed that we're going to talk about Auguste Franchomme. I feel like I said it right that time.
Yes.
So let's get right into it. How did you discover him?
Well, I was actually looking for a topic for my doctoral thesis, and I read and speak French, and so I was looking for French topics or, English topics, and I found these recordings, and I just loved them. It was just really beautiful, accessible music. Most of it's out of print, so I already knew about his caprices and etudes. Those are in print. But he has a lot of concert pieces that have been out of print for almost 200 years. And I also discovered pretty quickly that there's almost nothing written about this guy. And not only have they been out of print, but most of them haven't been recorded. And they were kind of hard to find, at least in this country. So I've eventually made my way over to France and met several of his descendants and got to go to the Bibliothèque Nationale de France music department in Paris, which has most of his compositions, usually in their first editions, which are very cool because they have his fingerings and bowings, and they're pretty unique compared to what I was used to as a cellist. So that was pretty fascinating.
So you're looking for somebody to do like a unique dissertation on, and you've found that there was a dearth of information about this person. But what was it that drew you to him as a composer, or as a person, whatever it was?
Oh, well, I had more access to information about him as a composer first. The music was easier to find than anything about his personal life. But they're both pretty fascinating. The music is just, as I said, really accessible, beautiful pieces. A lot of it's incredibly virtuosic, which may be part of the reason it hasn't been recorded. It's very hard. And a lot of it is alternately still maybe virtuosic, but also kind of melancholy and misty and not particularly showy.
Yeah.
But I was thinking this morning, it's kind of like a prima ballerina dancer doing like a slow solo on stage with a lot of leaps, but they're not, going to bring the house down kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that was really appealed to me, just that sort of aesthetic of his music.
I see.
And I suppose most cellists would be drawn to it for that reason. We love things where we can sing and be melancholy on. That's kind of brings out the best of our instrument, I think. So
yeah, you cellists are pretty emo people.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's why we picked this instrument, I think. And then when I started to find out more about his personality, it really matched his compositions. He's incredibly accomplished from a very young age. He was the first professional musician in his family, and he went to the Paris Conservatoire at a young age. I think he was 16 or something like that, and got the Premier Prix within months. And
that's like
that's like their first prize. That's kind of like the top prize you can get at that conservatory, and they still give it out today. At some point, actually, it came with you actually received a cello if you got the Premier Prix.
Really?
But I don't know if he did, but he ended up acquiring one of the best cellos in the world, the Duport Strad. But before that, I have to say, he's most well known today, if you're not a cellist, because of his connections to Chopin. But before he met Chopin, he was already working as an orchestral cellist in opera orchestras. He played in all 3 opera orchestras in Paris, mainly the Italian Opera Orchestra, for about a decade. And he also played in an orchestra at the conservatory that he was a founding member of, and they specialized in reviving Beethoven, but they played with all sorts of soloists, including Mendelssohn and Chopin. Mm-hmm. And he also played chamber music with Chopin later when he met him, and Delphin Allard later in his life. And played a lot of solo concerts. He taught at the conservatory eventually for a long time, until just about a week before he died. And what else did he do? Oh, and he also played in the King's Chamber Orchestra, which was a really prestigious appointment. And Chopin actually once sent him a letter. We have the envelope still. It says, addressed to Auguste Franchomme, the solo cellist of the King's Musique de Roi, which really wasn't necessary to get the letter to him in Paris. But, Chopin was just saying, yeah, this is a really cool gig, and I'm going to put it on this envelope to you, which is very nice.
I should ask, when was this in history? What years are we talking?
Oh, sure. Well, Auguste was born in 1808.
Okay.
He died in 1884, I think, which is amazing in that time period. The average life expectancy at that time in Paris was 39 years old for a man, which is exactly how long Chopin lived, in fact. We think of Chopin as this sickly guy who died young. He didn't really die young. That was normal. And unfortunately, Franchomme outlived most people in his family. One thing that drew him to me is that he's at a very high level. He's doing all sorts of things. He's an orchestral cellist. He's a teacher. He's a chamber musician. He's a soloist. He's a composer. Those are all, except for composing, those are all things I do also. So, and perhaps not at quite as high a level, but I really admire that he was doing all of those things. And he was so busy. There are a lot of, everything I know about him, almost everything is from letters that we have. And the published ones that anyone can access are his correspondence with Chopin, but there are also some unpublished ones that the descendants I met shared with me. And from those we learn, there are a couple letters that are unpublished where he's talking about like a typical day that he has and how tired he is. And I think if I can recall one of them, a typical day was, I think he had to play for the king in the morning, then he had some chamber music with amateurs in the afternoon, and then he had to play a Mozart opera in the evening. And then he ended the letter by saying, "Oof, I'm so tired." And that's when he was a young man, and he continued that kind of schedule pretty late into his life.
Wow.
He also, he met his wife and was very, very attached to her. Her name was Emilie, and they had a very happy marriage. They had 3 children. And then she died of typhoid, and the three children were still pretty young. Yeah. She actually died she died in 1850, the year after Chopin did, which was the year after Franchomme's father did. So we had 3 deaths in a row. I think the last 2 really hit him particularly hard. And there's sort of a heartbreaking account of him in his apartment with his 3 kids right after his wife died, written by Jane Sterling, who was a woman who knew both Chopin and Franchomme. And he was saying, the house is unbearably silent without her, and how could, God do this to me, and I guess we'll, reunite in heaven. But he was apparently so devastated that he couldn't teach his son René cello lessons because he was too depressed, and he was thinking about putting them all in boarding school because he was still working and he had to support them all now. Apparently he decided later, after that letter was written, that he didn't have to do that, and he kept them home and he hired some help.
How old were his kids when this happened, when his wife died?
I think they were probably ranging from, I'm just guessing, like 6 to 12 or something like that.
Okay, so they weren't little tiny kids. They
weren't little tiny kids. The youngest one was René, and he ended up outliving 2 of his kids also.
Wow.
But his eldest daughter, Cécile, I think is part of the reason he lived so long, because she ended up living with him, and she married the husband of her sister after her sister died, and she sort of became his wife. And anyway, so these people don't sometimes remember how important women are behind successful men, and that this Cécile kind of really dedicated her life to others, including Auguste Franchomme.
That's what I have learned in learning about classical music, is that behind all of the great composers, there are these amazing women who were helping them. For example, I just learned about Bach's second wife, who transcribed all of his music and did it in this way that was, that really informs players still today. And, I just think that's definitely worth mentioning.
Oh, yeah. It is interesting. So those are some of the things that interested me about this guy.
How did he meet Chopin? What kind of role did Chopin play in his life?
Yeah, well, he played a big role in his life. They met when they were pretty young. Chopin was 22 and Auguste was 24. And Chopin came to Paris, and Franchomme met him a couple months later at a dinner party that Franz Liszt threw for those 2 and Ferdinand Hiller. So all these stars of classical music were having a small dinner together, which was, I'm sure it was amazing.
I bet.
And there's some letters actually that they all wrote together to Chopin that are pretty funny. They all had a pretty good sense of humor. And Franchomme was kind of like the quiet, practical one who definitely had a sense of humor, but he wasn't usually the one writing the letter or sticking out flamboyantly like Liszt might have been, or Chopin. But anyway, so they met and they hit it off right away. Ferdinand Hiller was going back to Germany for some reason, and so Liszt retired. Ferdinand got on his carriage, and Chopin, just having met Franchomme, said, "Hey, you want to come back to my apartment?" And Franchomme said, "Well, sure, as long as you play something for me on the piano." And according to some accounts that we have from people who spoke to Franchomme. And Chopin agreed, apparently, so they went back and they had a late night of playing music and talking, and that was the beginning of one of the most important friendships in both of their lives. And it was a really happy friendship. One thing we know from letters is that the following year, in 1833, they not only wrote a piece together, really wrote it together. Franchomme wrote the entire cello part. That's the Sans Robert le Diable duo concertante. But not only that, but Franchomme took him to a vacation at the guy's house that they were dedicating the piece to in Touraine, outside of Tours. And there's a pretty cute letter Chopin writes when he's going back to Paris saying, "Oh, I had such a great time there. It just seems like it was a dream when I think about it now, and especially when I think about those peasant girls in the barn and you're putting your nose in that flour," which according to a footnote in the correspondence, it's referring to a game where the goal was to pick up a gold ring with your nose, and I guess Franchomme's nose was the right shape that he could do it. So I think or maybe that was the punishment or something. I don't know. But there were peasant girls involved. And
so they were players, basically.
Yeah, they were having a really good time. And also, there's another letter from the same period where Adele Forest and Jules, I guess Adele Forest and her mother. Adele Forest was the daughter of Jules Forest, who owned that house called Coteau. And Adele was a pianist, a young pianist, and she was in Paris to meet Chopin. Franchomme had arranged it, and apparently Chopin was flaking out and he wasn't showing up. Ooh. And there's a letter that we have where Franchomme writes very firmly to Chopin, "Well, I know that you wouldn't want to disappoint me, and you really need to meet these lovely people, and they're going to be great patrons, but they're getting annoyed and they're about to leave Paris and you need to go over there right now." And apparently he did. And this relationship happened and this vacation happened and this piece was written and dedicated to them. But Franchomme was kind of the practical one, and Chopin could be a little temperamental and flaky sometimes, I think.
But they kind of, it sounds like they maybe grew up together a bit and influenced one another.
Oh, yeah. Okay. For sure.
Because when I first heard about this, I thought, okay, well, this guy, I know Franchomme was a cellist, and I was wondering if, like, Chopin said, "No, man, you got to write music. That's where it's at." But it sounds like they were both kind of doing the same thing. And
that's a really good question. I mean, Franchomme was already writing his caprices, but the number of the compositions he wrote when he knew Chopin was huge. It was he wrote more compositions when he knew Chopin than any other time in his life. So I know it was a huge inspiration just from the sheer number of compositions, and also just from stuff we see in the compositions. Like, for example, he wrote 3 sets of nocturnes for the cello, which had not been done for cello before, at least not in the form of this type of nocturne, which is sort of an ABA form, a introduction, middle section, and return of the introduction, with a sort of a lyrical line and a sort of broken chord accompaniment. That's a great example of Chopin's influence because that's the exact kind of nocturne he was writing, and he wrote them when he knew Chopin, and I'm sure that was a direct influence.
This is one of my very novice-y questions, but is that a theme that I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think this one in particular is very very much like a song. So that's sort of the first phrase of the song. I guess you could call it a theme.
Okay. I was learning the difference between a theme and a motive the other day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the middle part of this, which is about to start now, sounds like a lullaby.
many instruments is this that we're hearing?
Oh, this 2 cellos.
2 cellos, okay.
He actually arranged it for cello and piano too, but I like this version better.
That's a cool sound.
Which one?
It sounded like one of the cellists was playing 2 strings at once, I think.
Yeah. The Julie Breskin, the other cellist, has some double stops.
Is that what that's called?
When she has to play them at once, yes.
Okay.
And that's kind of a feature of the nocturne. But right now, she's playing chords, but they're broken. Like right here, like for example, coming up here. So she's playing the harmony, and I'm playing the melody. And she, in the first section, most of the time she's playing one note at a time, but on different strings. So she's outlining the chord, but she doesn't have to play them at the same time. But coming up, like right here, she does play the notes at the same time, and then they're called double stops.
Okay.
And now she's breaking the chord again.
So this is sort of early work, I'm guessing, by Franchomme, or at least the period when he was hanging out with Chopin.
When he knew Chopin. Do you want to go back to an even earlier one? Maybe?
Sure, yeah. Hear what he was doing before he met Chopin. That would be, yeah.
Yeah. I could even, I don't know if this is appropriate. You can tell me. Maybe it's too dorky, but I could read like the first review he got from a performance in Paris when he was playing an unidentified solo, which was probably one of his caprices. And I think the review kind of captures his personality for his entire life in his performance review.
All right, yeah, let's hear it. Should we bring up the piece while you read?
Sure. Why don't we do a Caprice number 1, because that's a good contrast to some of the melancholy stuff.
Okay.
Well, it's up to you. If you want like another like melancholy deep one, that would be Caprice number 9, and if you want a fast peppy one, that would be Caprice number 1.
Let's do fast and peppy.
Okay. Well, number 1 is the fast and peppy one.
Number 1.
Like I was saying, this review really captures, I think, the personality of Franchomme and his performance, his compositions, and his life. So he was playing at the Conservatoire at one of these crazy concerts in 1829, which also featured like movements from symphonies and singers and just a total mix of things on a program that you would never find today. And it also included a cello solo, unidentified, played by Auguste Franchomme, who was at the time completely unknown in 1829. And so the critic for the La Revue Musicale was named François-Joseph Féty, and he wrote, "A young man, a child, Monsieur Franchomme has come, unknown, and played without pretension a cello solo in a manner that suddenly places him in the lineage of the greatest artists. He stated a theme without any ornament, and the audience was transported. The 4 or 5 rounds of applause were barely enough for the audience to express their pleasure." And he was probably playing one of his caprices. He didn't publish these until 1835, but they can be played as solos, unlike most of his other works. And they're some of his earliest things. So I think he was probably playing one of them without the accompaniment.
Nice.
me too.
So we should go forward in time and hear something that was after Chopin.
Sure. Well, how about we were talking about maybe playing some of the Chopin transcriptions, and these transcriptions for cello quartet were never published. There are some manuscripts I found in the library, and I transcribed them myself from his manuscripts, but they're guessing they're from the third quarter of the 19th century, which puts them at sort of the end, some of the last things he wrote. And he never published them. He was teaching a lot at the conservatory at the time. He probably meant to play them with the students. Maybe he did play them with the students there. So maybe we could listen to the Ballade transcription.
All right.
This is kind of typical of Franchomme in that it has some pretty high cello playing for the first cello, which is me on this recording. He was known for his accomplished thumb position and high playing, famous for that during his lifetime. And it's obvious looking at his pieces, other pieces that he likes to play up there.
So, wait, what did you just say about the thumb?
He likes to play high up on the cello, like high notes. And for us, when we go way up there, we need to use our thumb as a playing finger, because we can't put it behind the neck anymore. So we put it on top of the fingerboard, and it can be a playing finger. And for Franchomme, unlike modern cellos today, it wasn't just a playing finger. It's a little harder to vibrate on your thumb than another finger. You kind of have to make your own fingertip with it by building up a callus there. You don't really have because you're playing on the side of your thumb.
Yeah.
So the fact that Franchomme used the thumb so much, including in the middle of melodies on really long notes, indicates to me that he probably didn't vibrate that much. It wasn't a big priority like it is today for modern romantic cellists. Even when he's playing a romantic piece, that's one of the fingerings that I find pretty fascinating. And the other one that strikes me is that he has a ton of slides, and he played with this Italian opera orchestra for over a decade, so he must have heard singers, sliding up to high notes and going back down, and that's kind of out of style today. Certainly, I studied with Janos Starker, and he really didn't like slides in a row up and down. If I did that, he would say, "I just had lunch, please don't do that." And not just me, he said it to other people too, but that's one of the things he liked to pick on us for. But, I get to look at these first editions with Franchomme's fingerings, and they have slides all over the place on the same finger. And at the same time, critics said he played incredibly tastefully compared to Belgian cellist Servet, for example. They would compare him to other cellists and said Franchomme was the most in tune and very tasteful. And yet there are all these slides, which, by modern standards are maybe not so tasteful. So you have to find a way to do them lightly and tastefully, I guess. So that's kind of a challenge.
So for his time, he was maybe not employing that technique as much as others were?
I think he was employing it more, actually.
Oh, okay. I see. And that's why they were calling him tasteful, because
I think he was doing it. I mean, that's part of the mystery to me, that he was doing it in a really tasteful way. I think he was. My guess is also because he has a lot of notes slurred under one bow. A slur being like a phrase marking. So we have cellists, we have down bow and up bow, and we can fit as many notes as we can into a bow, and then we have to change if we want the sound to keep going. We have to go back and forth.
Yeah.
And he would have huge slurs, huge numbers of notes in one bow indicated in his parts. So my guess is that he not only did he not vibrate that much, but he played pretty quickly so that he could fit all those notes in one bow. Very in tune compared to most cellists of the day. So I think all of those things, and just his like I said, his personality, they're talking about his being sort of unflamboyant and without pretension. I love that in that review. And in fact, he actually got criticized for that a little bit. He also played his entire life without an end pin, which in the middle of his life, since he lived so long, people were starting to use the end pin, which is this pin that goes at the bottom of the cello, and we all use it today. It's hard to imagine playing without it. But he played incredibly difficult things like Chopin's cello sonata, many performances of opera solos, and like the famous solo of Rossini's William Tell, which goes way up there. All of his incredibly difficult virtuosic music without an end pin. He absolutely refused to add it to his cello. He said it changed the sound. He didn't like it.
So his cello is just sitting on the ground?
It was not sitting on the ground. It was actually sitting on his calves, which means that he couldn't move as much as someone like Servais, who did have an end pin. And was Servais, I keep going back to him because he was compared to Servais sometimes. Servais was sort of like the flamboyant guy who moved a lot and he emoted a lot when he played. And he played with Franz Liszt, who was also a very emotional player, very flamboyant compositions. And Franchomme couldn't move. That was his technique. He had to hold it with his calves. He had to stay in place. Yeah. And also just, his personality wasn't really, bringing attention to himself. It doesn't seem like, despite the virtuosity, it just sort of just tossed off and, look, I can do this and it's easy. I'm sure it was easy for him. But he
don't
wasn't.
Mind me. I'm just playing this.
Yeah, don't mind me. I'm
music.
Just playing, cello better than anyone else in Paris right now. But, that's just what I do. And I'm playing on the best cello ever made.
But it's cool, man. Whatever.
Yeah.
Well, we've got time to hear maybe part of one more piece. Is there something that you think just really captures the essence of Franchomme's work?
Gosh. Well, he didn't just transcribe Chopin and other composers. He also used them in his compositions, as a lot of composers did in that time period. So maybe we should include the Bellini Norma transcription that he wrote, which is basically a mix of two different melodies from the opera, with a little Franchomme virtuosity thrown in there.
Okay.
This is definitely an opera he played when he was in the Italian opera orchestra. This is Bellini wrote this in 1831, but it came to Paris in 1835, and I'm sure he performed it before he left the job, and a couple years later. This is a beautiful duet between Adalgisa and Norma. And just sticking it on the cello like he did, it's kind of, they didn't have iPods back then. If you went to the opera and you had this gorgeous melody you wanted to hear again, you either had to pay for another opera ticket or buy a cello piece transcription like this one, if you played the cello, or go to a concert and hear Franchomme play it himself for you. So it's just a chance to hear these gorgeous melodies again.
Nice. So this is a piece that people would have gone to see the opera, and then you're saying that Franchomme and other cellists, other musicians would put on concerts where you could just go and hear the music?
Yeah,
Is that
he certainly changed it a little. Like these arias don't, like he's playing Costa Diva, and those arias don't go run into each other in the opera. So he, added a little Franchomme there.
I see.
But yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think he knew his audience. Paris music goers loved opera so much that there were 3 full-time opera houses.
Wow.
At the same time, which is amazing, actually. Plus, some smaller companies at the same time, probably. And so, I'm sure he loved them too.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that went on. That you could go somewhere, hear a show, or see musicians just play the music from these operas. It's crazy that opera was that popular at some point.
Yeah, I think
people
that,
are like, I want to hear it again.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
These
these are gorgeous pieces. I mean, this Casta Diva is very well known still today. It's just rightfully so. I'm so glad I got to play it on the cello. I'm so glad he arranged it. Yeah, it's beautiful stuff.
It's really lovely.
And that little transition you just heard is all Franchomme, because now he's back to the first song, first duet aria. And he had to make a transition to get back there. So
you've either written books about Franchomme or are about to publish books on Franchomme. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, I wrote the liner notes to the CD. That was sort of the first thing that I published, I guess. And I've written the introduction to an edition of some cello piano works by Franchomme, and that's going to be published by Dover Publications in January, we think, if we can get all the materials from the libraries by then. We have most of them. And Dover has also invited me to possibly write a book about the personal things I've found out about his life and his connections to Chopin. So when I have time, I will try to do that. It's hard balancing everything,
Sure.
But eventually I'd like to do that, maybe when I retire
so
from being a performer.
I'm assuming people can keep up with what you're doing and your publications and CDs and all of that on your website?
Oh, yes.
Which is, it's just louisedubin.com, right?
It's Louise-Dubin.com.
Okay.
Because there's a real estate agent in Florida with the same name. she I think she has it without the hyphen. So yeah, I'm Louise-Dubin.com.
Nice. We'll put a link to that up on our website when we post this episode. Louise Dubin, it has been really nice to talk to you. Thanks so much for taking the time and teaching me about this composer that I've never heard of before.
Oh, thank you for being interested. I think it's really great music. I'm glad to get it out there.
It's awesome. All right, well, take care. Thanks. All right, that does it for this episode of Classical Classroom. For more Classroom, go to houstonpublicmedia.org/classroom. Follow us on Twitter and Tumblr and YouTube. Oh my! Subscribe to us, rate us, and review us on iTunes, or you can email me at dclay@houstonpublicmedia.org. I love getting your emails, so send them. Thanks today to Todd Terr-ee-bleh Hulslander for making us sound nice. Thanks to Program Director Sinjin Flynn for doing all the things. Thanks to Editor Mark DiClaudio for his piercing X-ray eyes. Thanks to Louise Dubin for being here today. Thanks to me for saying words. And thanks to you for listening. We'll catch you next time.